Okay, good morning, day 3 of the conference. I'm sure the audience is feeling the effects of 2 days of intense networking and partying and all of the other stuff that's been going on. But it's my pleasure to introduce Karim to you, CTO, co-founder of Ramp, an exciting company in the fintech slash space, where expense management space. And I think maybe as an introduction, my name is Sumant. I'm a co-founder, managing partner of March Capital. We invest in software companies, have a global mandate. I've been doing this now for almost 24 years, so it's been a long time. And it's always fun to see companies succeed and then have a chance to hear from the founders on what their journey's been and what they've seen happening, what they will see happen. And maybe with that, I'll turn it over to you and give the audience a little bit of a brief on yourself as much as the journey of Ramp.
Sounds good. Yeah, I can do that. Thanks for, great convo, Sumant. I'm excited to be chatting with you today. And so I'm Karim Atiyeh. I've been working on Ramp now for a little over 4 years. So we started the company 4.5 years ago in the US. Support businesses with their corporate card needs, spend management needs, and really anything related to how a business allocates, distributes, and manages their spend. Originally from the region, actually. Grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, and I've been in the US most of my professional life, but excited to be back here for FII and talking about the journey a little bit more.
So talk about Ramp and what inspired you to start a company in expense management. Not everyone wakes up and thinks about expense management as a space to be involved in. Maybe even go back a little bit and tell us a little bit about your last company and how that led to this one.
It was, it was a very natural transition. So my first company that I started in 2014 was started with the same co-founder, actually. And we were traveling all the time for our work, for our jobs in New York, and sort of started noticing that prices were fluctuating on the internet. And as we dug a little bit deeper, realized that essentially the large retailers had all the data advantage, right? Like they could look at all the data points on who's buying when and what they're buying and what their purchasing power is, and price discriminate. And that meant that you'd pay different prices for products depending on whether you're shopping from a Mac or a PC or on a Saturday versus a Monday. And we thought there was an opportunity to essentially take the other side of that.
Makes sense, yeah.
Build technology to help consumers save as much money as possible, but also as much time, because a lot of people I thought were wasting time online, trying to find the best price when really it's a pretty mundane task, and technology should be able to help you with that. And that was before the advent of LLMs and Gen AI, so we had to build a lot of the early versions of that ourselves to automate the interactions.
So was it predictive stuff? Was it you start of predicting where things will be when you want to make decisions? What was the thought there?
Not so much of that. It was actually tracking prices on behalf of customers, right? Of things that they had already bought. So we were in their inbox looking at receipts, tracking prices, and whenever the price of something they had bought dropped, we would reach out to stores on their behalf to get them a refund. And that piece was automated. So the emailing of support agents, the interaction with chatbots, we would do all of that on behalf of our customers.
And what convinced your customers to let you do that?
And
now I'm taking you back to when you started.
Yeah, of course. It's a lot of the pushback that we got from investors in the early days.
It's why would I let you in?
Who would give you access to their email? That's kind of scary. And it's actually pretty surprising how much people talk about privacy, but don't actually take the actions to show that they truly care about their privacy that much. So we put a lot of work into making sure that our systems were secure. But at the end of the day, yes, you needed to give us access to your mailbox. And I guess it worked, and word of mouth was very powerful. And people were like, well, I just set this thing up, and I'm now saving hundreds of dollars a month not doing anything. And the value prop is quite strong. It's sign up here and get free money. It's basically
it. If in 4.5 years you've hit this sort of value point, as I think is publicly known, where you guys raised your last round at, you've obviously done something quite right. And so let's talk about every year, every time, what were the different inflection points to the business that made you think, okay, yes, we see something that has the potential
Yeah,
and
sure.
deserves to be an independent standalone company? What did you see?
Well, there's a very different mindset. So I was talking about like the first company, Paribus, which was very sort of like experimental,
Right.
trying things.
That was
seeing what
Capital One
sticks.
who bought it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sold that to Capital One, and Ramp was very different. Like Ramp, we had some of these like early learnings at Paribus, which is like, okay, people love automating the saving of money and time,
Yeah.
right? People are very finicky, and they're hard to sort of like convince to pay for anything or sign up for anything. Businesses, on the other hand, tend to be more rational in general.
Right.
Decision makers are like they have a very narrow, they have a narrower mandate. They're very rational, and so Ramp was a lot more. Maybe I'd compare it more to how you make a movie, right? So you have like this idea for a script in your head, then you raise a lot of funds, and you don't just iterate from scene to scene. You decide up front of like, hey, this is what I want to do, and I want to do things that way, and you give it a year or two. So it's probably very different from it's like the generic startup advice that you tend to get sometimes.
It is, yes, yes.
But in our case, it was like, look, we knew people needed corporate cards. Like companies already used them. The innovation was a lot more on sort of like the business model, which was that we didn't want to win because we had points and rewards in marketing. We wanted to win because we had a better product. That people were picking Ramp because of the software that helped them save time and money, not because Samuel Jackson or Taylor Swift did an ad and you got excited because you can get points to
That's
attend a
called
concert.
Capital One.
Yeah, basically. Or, I mean, all of them. Or Amex
All of the
or
card
Chase.
companies,
And
yeah.
it's all like points and rewards and marketing and like we're cool and get you access to fun events, which was very different from what we tried to focus on.
And so year one, year two, product development, getting into market.
Yep.
Year three, year four, seeing it scale. Talk a little bit about that scale. What did you guys see happen?
Yeah, I mean, we launched, it was like a month before the lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns. So it was quite an interesting launch. It's like we were gearing up for so long.
So expense profiles for a lot of corporates dramatically changed.
Exactly.
Right.
And the risk profiles, right?
The risk profiles.
It's like you're launching, and like most companies like ours that kind of like test the waters with lending in the early days, it's like you hope that like the waters are kind of calm so that you can get enough tests so that you know where or what underwriting models you want to have. And our test was like in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of so like manually reviewing every businesses and being very early and just like making decisions like, okay, we think these businesses make sense and those do not. So we could not work with essentially any sort of like travel and entertainment related businesses, which generally tend to be sort of like the core of what corporate cards.
Expense, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean that helped us. I think it was a blessing in disguise because like we started focusing on like all the things that were like very core to the business that you could not cancel even in times of I mean in times like COVID. So like we actually ended up winning not because it's like we won a market that we weren't going after initially, which was how people pay sort of like their rent or their AWS bill or like also like the core costs of the business, and they were picking Ramp because of the ease of use of sort of issuing virtual cards and controlling your spend and making sure that you don't get overcharged, and very quickly sort of like our core pitch of like we help you save money like really resonated with folks trying to figure out how to survive.
And so one quick question, and then let's talk about what's happening in the world and what you see happen over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
How do you charge for this?
I mean, it's the beauty of, I guess, our business models. The merchants pay what's called
So when you
interchange,
give them
right?
business from what you suggest to your customers, they give you something for that.
I mean, like
it's a well-known model. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like every card, like today, like the debit or credit card that you have in your wallet, like you
Understood.
generally don't pay anything for it. You just
So now you're sitting on top of all of this data. You're
Yeah.
seeing it across tons of different enterprises, across different verticals, sizes of businesses. And this is a leading question. What is this world of AI and what's happening in the world,
Yes.
what's happening, mean to you, and how do you see that? What do you see Ramp 5 years from now?
Yeah. Well, on the first one, we actually release every quarter a spending report and look at like the patterns, the spending patterns of the companies on our platform, and like unsurprisingly, huge spike in spending on things like OpenAI and Hugging Face and Adept and a lot of like those like AI companies, which It's very
in
exciting
turn are
to see.
paying the big cloud providers, who in turn are paying
Yes.
chip providers. Yeah.
100%. So
Yes.
I guess NVIDIA is a big winner in all of this. But also, I think an interesting trend is like you see a higher percentage of business spend go towards cards than ever before, as opposed to so like the regular like PO process and procurement process. And I think that's a trend that probably started before us with like the advent of companies like Slack that like, really change how like businesses buy software.
Yes, very true. And we talked about our business CrowdStrike, very similar profile there.
100%.
Yeah.
So it's like fun to see not just like spend grow at things like OpenAI grow across our companies, but also how that spend even starts in companies and evolves. It's like you'll have a pocket within a company starting to use a product, and maybe, I don't know, like the product managers are excited about like Linear or something like that for like project management, and like all of a sudden like the whole company is using it a couple months later. So you start like being able to predict like
That's
where
huge value to your customers, by the way.
100%. And that's a product that we actually launched recently to give them some intelligence.
Exciting, yeah.
So it's been fun. I mean, that's really what we spend most of our time doing is like how can we use our scale and our data to really like benefit our customers and give them an edge.
So, I mean, I don't know how much you're allowed to share, but give everyone a sort of sense of your size and scale. Whatever metrics you're allowed to share.
Sure. I mean, we're hundreds of millions in revenue. We've, at this point, also hundreds of, like thousands of cardholders on the platform. We're closer to like 30,000 businesses on the platform, but it really, I think the most surprising aspect of where we are is like the sheer the difference in the types of businesses that we support. It's like we have the oldest potato farm in the United States on the platform, and we have companies like launching rockets into space. And like the finance teams of both these companies can agree that like, okay, we got to modernize our finances, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I guess my understanding would be that you are planning to be a standalone public company. And
yes.
As you think about that process, how do you think that impacts what you're doing? How do you think that plays out over the next few years? What's your thinking around that? And this is not necessarily something written in stone, but just generally.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are. I'm obviously like not an expert in the topic. It's like I learned from the people before us who have gone public and what they've said, and our like board members. I mean, Keith Raboy, who's on our board, is a huge proponent of going public early. Yeah. And I think there's something to having a real feedback loop of like retail and a broader set of investors, like telling you what they think is right and wrong. I mean, even companies like Facebook to this day like benefit greatly from it. And like the pressures of the public market, yeah, can be stressful, but they can also be very helpful in setting you on the right path.
Yeah.
So I don't really see it as an end game as much as like, hey, at some point it'd be good to have like a compass from like the public market of like where they think the world is going, and to use it as a feedback loop to figure out like where we want to invest as a business. Today it might be more of a distraction given the number of bets that we have going on and like so like the high risk initiatives that we're taking. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I just look at it as like one step in probably a very long-term journey. If people
There's
forget
a positive and negative to it.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
But people forget how much it's like value has accumulated for like Amazon and Google and Facebook since they've gone public. Most of it has been like.
But in some ways, you probably are very lucky that you were not public over the last 24 months.
It would have been a distraction more than anything, for sure.
Okay, so you know this is supposed to be an audience Q&A. We have the audience is still waking up because it's very early in the morning for most people. But I'm going to ask you two questions, and we'll see if people have any other questions for you. Over the last 4.5 years of building this company, what was the most surprising thing that you saw in this journey?
Yeah.
And then what are you the most excited about going forward?
In terms of surprising, I guess in retrospect it sounds obvious, but the size of the market really helps.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to build like a multi-billion-dollar company in a multi-billion-dollar market, but like, and it's something that like you don't really think about when you're like an early stage founder, because you're like, well, I just need to make something work, and the odds are so slim that like it just doesn't matter what market I'm in. It's like I want to make something work. But the beauty of being in such a big market is that you can still operate like a seed stage company even at a multi-billion-dollar valuation, which I love. Like you could take risks in all sorts of niches, and every single one of those ideas can be like a billion-dollar plus idea on its own. So it's surprising like how much more room there is to grow even at the scale that we're at today. So, and the maybe most exciting part to this day is like still the people. It's like you even started the conversation asking about whether I was passionate about expense management, and the short and honest answer is no. I could not care less. It's like that's not what I'm passionate about. But I am passionate about working with extremely talented individuals who challenge me every day. And I think in fintech, you get to do that in, I think, a breadth of fields that is bigger than most other industries.
So the one thing I've learned from this conversation is the real underlying premise of what changed is how more and more of enterprise expense has moved to being on cards. On move to being an individual decision maker, which is versus going through a process, and now that needs to be managed. And it's a very critical part of an enterprise's business to be able to manage that. And I think you guys are providing a critical service to do that. So with that, I'm going to ask in the audience if anyone has any questions for our founder here, who's building an exceptional company. Yes, please.
Hello. Hi, my name is Dima Adriashi. I'm founder of Honu, London-based. We're building a decision infrastructure for AI-first businesses. I have actually a couple of questions, if you don't mind. One of them is more on the decision about going with, like I assume you're going mostly, from the businesses you mentioned that you're servicing, it seems you have like quite a spectrum from like small businesses to enterprise. I would have been very interested in understanding your thought process when you were initially going to launch. Was there anything kind of pre-product market fit that considerations about like, should I go first for small businesses as initially or enterprise? That's my first question. I just have a second one, which is more around team and like where your views about remote work, and especially as you started before COVID and you went into COVID and then we got out of COVID. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's like an encyclopedia of knowledge, but please, at least on the first one, you know, the reason is people never cease to surprise you. But on the first one, that's a really interesting question, which is, you know, how did you
pick the right customer?
Go into the market, and how did it expand customer base?
So there's a couple of things. So one is we had gone with our first company through Y Combinator, and through that process, so I got to meet a lot of other startup founders and company founders. And the good thing about like startups is they tend to be early adopters of technology. So in the early days, there was certainly a focus on startups. We know a lot of them. We can iterate very fast. They tend to like adopt technology. They give you feedback. And we wanted to serve them and help them. Like that was kind of our community. But as like time went on, it's like we started, I think I'll challenge your question a little bit. And it's like we started focusing like less on a size of company and more into like a moment in a company's life. And specifically that moment was when a company decides that like finance is important enough that someone should be fully in charge of it, right? So like really we started like obsessing over like, okay, what is that moment when like a startup makes the decision to hire someone to take over finance? And that moment was like really key for us. It's like someone comes in and like they want their tools. They need their, just like perfect their craft and like take over a process. And you see that like with I mean, same with like Salesforce being an example of like, when do you like really start using Salesforce? Like you hire your first salesperson and then you like start using Salesforce. And
I think some of these definitions are also sort of changing as software is being developed and then distributed and then consumed very differently than it was maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, instantaneously downloaded, time to value is really quick, the world is your market, you don't need to have resellers and integrators all over the world and wait for a year before your software shows value. I think that's critical in this part. I think your second question was around team, and I'd love to hear, as you have grown, how's that changed and what's been exciting and challenging in that environment?
It continues to change. I mean, we were forced to grow. I mean, we were, I think, 15 to 20 people when the world went remote, and I think by the time things reopened, I think we were closer to like 200. So the reality is like we just had to hire a lot of people who, I mean, I didn't meet them in person for a year and a half or two in some cases.
And what surprised you the most? I can tell you the one thing.
I mean, I'm sure you'll resonate with that, but like how tall or short people were. It's like the first thing you notice, like after you haven't seen people for years, like, oh wow, like you're so tall or you're so short. And it's weird because you don't notice that on camera. But look, we had to adapt our interview process to be sort of like remote, like some people interview much better remotely than they do in person. And that was a skill set that was important. And like looking back, like I think we may have like one of the best so like remote sales team. It's like we surprisingly, like to this day, it's a lot of like Zoom and emails, and we like our numbers are incredible when it comes to like being able to like make the sale like remotely. And I think because we were forced to figure it out, and like one of the opportunities that we have today is like going in person and meeting people and going to events, which we don't do a lot of.
So obviously we've seen a lot of that in our own portfolio, as well as in our own firm. And coming back to reality where things are now coming back to what they were 5 years ago is also a challenge, a different type of challenge.
100%.
Because people they're not excited by it. So anyway, I think we are out of time. I want to thank you for being with us, taking the time, and thank you for the FI to have us here. It's an exciting conversation, and hope it was useful for people in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.